Hello everyone, my name is Janice Fung and I'm a second year graduate SLP student from ASU. First of all, thank you very much for attending this presentation on language differences versus language disorders, how to diagnose Chinese English bilingual children with SLI, and your interest in this topic. Before you continue with this video, I would appreciate if you could take some time and fill out the pre-presentation survey. The survey link should be attached in the email or down in the description of the video. So let's begin. Dr. Ria Paul once defined language disorder as a significant discrepancy in language skills compared with normative standards for the child's age or developmental level, while a language difference encompasses language skills that diverge from the standard mainstream language but are considered typical for that population. Because of the complexity of bilingual language development, we as SLPs often have a difficult time accurately diagnosing a bilingual child with speech and language impairment. Lack of resources, language barriers, and lack of cultural humility can also be some contributing factors of the challenges we face during diagnosis. So, the purpose of today's presentation is to provide you with resource on how to diagnose Chinese English bilingual children with language disorders, which we'll call it speech language impairment or SLI in the presentation. In the first part of the video, we're going to talk about phonology, sentence structure, syntax, and morphology in Chinese, and then we're going to take a brain break. The second part of the video will be focusing on characteristics of SLI in both Cantonese and Mandarin, and factors that affect bilingual language acquisition. Lastly, the presentation will discuss cultural perspectives. The Chinese languages have more than 200 dialects. Mandarin is China's official language, while Cantonese is the second most widely spoken Chinese dialect worldwide. As of 2007, there are 988 million native Chinese speakers in the world and over 2.8 million native Chinese speakers in the US. Even though Cantonese and Mandarin are both Chinese languages, people have argued that they are two different languages than dialects, since they are not mutually intelligible. They have different pronunciation and words, and their phonemic inventories are very different. Written communication is somewhat unified because they share the same Chinese characters and some of the grammatical structures. However, Cantonese speaker might use different slangs or word choices than Mandarin speakers, or vice versa in written communication. For example, I was born and raised to speak Cantonese. If I were to pick up a book that is written by a Mandarin speaker, I would have little problem comprehending the book, except for some specific slangs or word choices that I'm not familiar with. But it is very likely that the contextual clues in the book would fill me in. However, if I were to carry a conversation with a Mandarin speaker, but I have never learned how to speak Mandarin before, I would have no idea what the speaker is talking about because of the pronunciation and words are so different. When we encounter clients whose native language is Chinese, it would be wise for us to ask our client what dialect of Chinese is spoken at home, as the different dialects have a different phonemic inventory. The map that I'm showing you is an estimation of percentage of Chinese speakers in the US as of 2012. It is not surprising to find states like California or Washington or New York to have a dense population of Chinese individuals. However, I was surprised to find how Arizona is covered in purple, and I believe that the Chinese population will continue to grow in the valley. So, now that you understand Mandarin and Cantonese are not mutually intelligible, we'll take a closer look into their phonemic inventory and how they are different from English. From now on, I'll address the languages as Cantonese, Mandarin, or Chinese. If I address the topic in Chinese, that means the information is applicable to both Cantonese and Mandarin. If I address it only in Cantonese, but somehow can be generalized in Mandarin, I would state that explicitly in the presentation, and I hope that won't cause too much confusion. So I'm going to start with Mandarin. Mandarin is a tonal language and it has 5 tones. Words mainly are CV structured. They also have CVC structured, though they are only limited to have n and sound in the final consonant position. I'm sure by now you have noticed that all 5 syllables are pronounced as ma in here. In Mandarin, tones are essential in determining the meaning of the words. It can cause miscommunication if you did not get the tone right. So for here, the tones are ma, 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 ma. Now we're going to switch gears and talk about Cantonese. The information and resources that I'm going to present will be Cantonese focused, as Cantonese is my first language and I believe that I have a better understanding of the linguistics in Cantonese than Mandarin. But I've also included additional resources on Mandarin in the handout and resource package for your reference. Cantonese is also a tonal language, and the first 6 tones are either CV structured or CVC structured syllables with nasals at the final consonants. Tones in the syllables are also essential in communication, as tones determine the meaning of the words. Cantonese has 9 tones in total, but first I'm going to show you the first 6 tones in Cantonese. C, 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 C. It is important to keep in mind that even with tones, words are contextual based. For example, for the first tone in here, C, they used an example of this character which means poetry, but in a different context and with different characters, it can also mean lion or silk. And these 2 words are pronounced as C also. So now that you know the basic 6 tones of Cantonese, I'm going to introduce you to the other 3. The 7th, 8th, and 9th tone in Cantonese are only CVC structured, and their CVC structured are limited to have unreleased p, t, and k sound at final consonant positions. The 7th, 8th, and 9th tone are similar to the 1st, 3rd, and 6th tone in Cantonese. For example, the first tone in here is sam, and the 7th tone in here is yat, which is actually the same tone, but because the 7th tone, yat, has a CVC syllable structure with the t sound at the final position, it is named the 7th tone. Now let me show you how these 9 tones sound like. Sam mun sai ngao lam min yat ba di. What this sentence is saying is 3 bowls of small beef brisket noodles, 100 plate. So here is a Venn diagram of Cantonese and English phonemic inventory. You can see that Cantonese and English share quite a few of consonants, but most of the affricates and fricatives are unique in English. For a Cantonese speaker who speaks English, it is very common for v and z sound to be devoiced and to have some substitutions in consonants. For example, vacuum might be substituted with the w sound, so will become vacuum. For the interdental fricatives in here, like something or thank you might be thank you or something. And then that might sound like dat. And then since there's no sound in Cantonese, it might be substituted with an o, because, and also n and o sound are interchangeable in Cantonese. If airs occur on the sound shared between Cantonese and English, which is right here in the pink area, that can be indicative of a speech sound impairment. So yeah. And this is the Cantonese English vowel chart. Vowels that are in black are the ones that Cantonese and English share, except for the ones that are highlighted with light blue. The vowels in the vowels in orange are vowels that are unique to English, which suggests that Cantonese speakers will have vowel errors and vowel confusion due to speech perception difficulties, as some of the vowels do not exist in their native language, especially with the short vowels. For example, there is no I sound in Cantonese. So bit, they might say it as beat. Statistic might sound like statistic, or physics might sound like physics. Other than that, A sound in here is also unique to English. So some vowel confusion might be bad, might sound like bed, dad might sound like dead. When you're working with Cantonese English bilingual children and have observed these vowels distortion, I would try to increase their awareness in these English unique vowels, but I would not make it an official goal since it is a language difference. Here is a chart for phonological processes in Cantonese. As you can see, similar to English, final consonant deletion, stopping, and fronting are some phonological processes that should be resolved at an early age. Backing is quite common in Cantonese, but not as much in English. So that is something that you might want to look out for when you are assessing speech sound development on a bilingual child. And here are some common error patterns you would observe when Cantonese speakers speak in English. These include substituting speech sounds and devoicing voice fricatives that do not exist in Cantonese inventory, distorting vowels, especially having difficulty distinguishing long and short vowels that we have previously talked about. Final consonant deletion should be resolved at an early age, but keep in mind that this is very common in Mandarin speakers because most of their syllables are CV structured. Errors in consonant clusters should also be expected. For example, problem might sound like problem. So now we're gonna move on to talk about word order and sentence structure. In Cantonese, statements usually follow SVO structure, and in order to convey the message effectively, we need to add more information in the sentence with multiple adverbial phrases. As you can see on the right side in here, these two sentence structures are the most basic and commonly used structures in daily conversation. Keep in mind that there are many variations and exceptions in Cantonese sentence structures, but today we're only focusing on these two. The first sentence is 我頭先同佢喺廚房煮緊飯. And the direct translation is I just now with him in kitchen cooking rice. If we adopt the second sentence structure in here, the direct translation would be, just now I was him in kitchen cooking rice. As you can see, time, manner, and place are injected at the beginning of the sentence or in the middle of the sentence, which is different from how English works. In English, the adverbial phrases are usually injected in the beginning or towards the end of the SVO sentence. In other words, it is expected to see errors in word order in bilingual children. I also want to emphasize that even though this information is Cantonese focused, it can be generalized in Mandarin as they share similar word order and sentence structure. However, keep in mind that semantics or word choices might be different from Cantonese because of the dialectal differences. Regarding sentence structure and questions, the biggest difference between Cantonese and English is that questions remain in the SVO structure in Cantonese. WH words are not necessarily in the beginning of the question. They can also be in the middle or towards the end of the questions, and questions usually end with final particles. For example, the first question here is 點解你走啊? The direct translation would be why you leave? And then the second sentence in here, 你點解走啊? Noted that the question word moved to the middle, and direct translation is you why leave? But then for both of the sentences, the English translation would be why are you leaving? For Cantonese influenced English, errors of using SVO structure in questions can be expected. They might also be omitting the copula or auxiliary, like in here, the word are is omitted in the sentence, and it should be expected in Cantonese English bilingual children too. Let's look on the right side. For questions that do not use WH words, sometimes SVO structure with a rising intonation or intonation plus final particle would be enough to indicate that it is a question. For example, rising intonation would be the question in orange in here. 你食緊飯? Again, 你食緊飯? noted the rising intonation towards the end. SVO structure with intonation and final particle might sound like this. 你食咗飯啦? La is the final particle in here. Noted that the intonation of this example is not rising. The final particle determines if this is a question or a statement. For Cantonese-influenced English, rising intonation in questions might not be used since it is not a fixed rules for questions in Cantonese. In Mandarin, questions also remain in SVO structure, and question words can also be at the beginning, middle, or towards the end of the question. However, since Mandarin uses different semantics from Cantonese, their final particles and intonation in questions are a little different than Cantonese. After you have some basic knowledge on word order and sentence structure in Cantonese, we're going to talk about syntax and morphology. In terms of morphology, English tends to use auxiliaries like SMR, did or do, has or have, with verb inflection to indicate time and mark tenses. In Chinese, there's no auxiliaries or verb inflection. Precise temporal adverbs like just now, a while ago, yesterday, tomorrow are used to indicate time. We also use aspect markers to mark tenses in sentences, which we will talk about in the coming slides. Chinese languages adopt high context communication, which means that it is expected the listener and the communicator to have mutual understanding of the context. So some of the morphology can be omitted if referential clarity is established in the conversation. Let me see, right here. Okay, Fletcher et al. Did a study on morphosyntax in Cantonese and stated that Cantonese is a hallmark case of an isolating language with no grammatical inflections for person, number, or gender, and no distinctions according to case even with the pronoun system. And this statement can also apply to Mandarin, which means Chinese does not use any articles, verb inflection to indicate verb tenses, any plurals markers, copula auxiliary, or using any gender-specific pronouns in oral discourse. I hope at this point you're probably wondering how people use Chinese to communicate effectively if they have none of these features listed above. In a coming slide, I'm going to walk you through the morphology in Chinese, especially on how Chinese language marks verb tenses and plurals. Bear with me, I know this is a lot to take in, but take a deep breath and keep pushing, and we'll take a brain break soon. Verbs are not inflected to convey verb tenses in Cantonese. Aspect markers are used to mark tenses in Cantonese, and they're bound morphemes. They are placed immediately before or after the verb and are usually used with temporal adverbs. However, aspect markers are sometimes optional, especially when you have used precise temporal adverbs, which we will talk about on the next slide. Mandarin also uses aspect markers, but the semantics are different because of the dialectal difference. Now I'm going to show you some specific aspect markers in Cantonese. For marking past tense or present perfect tense, you use the character 着 or 过. There are more past tense or present perfect tense aspect markers, but I did not list them all in the presentation in here. However, if you look at the handout and the resource package, I have listed them in there and you can use it as a reference. For example, sleep is 瞓, slept will be 瞓咗. We're using the aspect marker here. And then go is 去, went is 去過. You might be wondering when to use 咗 or 過 to mark past tense. The answer is, it depends on the verb and the context of the conversation. For example, if you want to express that you have completed the action, like I went to the grocery store, then it will be more appropriate to use 咗, like 我去咗超級市場. if you want to express the fact that you have experienced during this action before, then using 过 is more appropriate. For example, I have listened to this song before, then it will be appropriate to use 过。我聽過呢首歌。For continuous tense or progressive tense, we usually use the character 緊 after the verb. There are more variations in the aspect markers for progressive tense, but today I'm going to focus on 緊 only. For example, we have learned that sleep is fun in here. So sleeping will be 瞓緊. Go is 去, then going will be 去緊. For the future tense, the aspect markers 會 is marked before the verb. For example, sleep is 瞓, will sleep will be 會瞓. Go is 去, will go will be 會去. Remember I mentioned how aspect markers can sometimes be optional in a sentence when you have used precise temporal adverbs. Let's look at the sentence here. 聽日我去銀行. The direct translation is tomorrow I go to bank. Notice I didn't use the word 會 in here. I have established a very precise temporal information by using tomorrow. 聽日. And in that case, the future tense aspect markers is optional in here. Now I'm going to talk about classifiers. From my perspective, classifiers are very complex in Cantonese, and it's like an advanced version of English articles and plurals markers combined. Classifiers are used to address a specific person or object, regardless of the quantity. The formula for using the classifiers are number plus classifier plus the person or object you're describing, or pronoun plus classifier plus person or object you're describing. Let's jump into the examples. I used apples as examples in here. The classifier for apple is 個. As you can see, an apple or the apple are both describing only one apple. So then they are all 一個蘋果, which follows the formula of classifiers. When a quantity changes to 10, but still specific in here, 10 apples, the number changes in the Chinese character, but the classifier remains in 個, 十個蘋果. Now look at these apples. These apples is 呢啲蘋果. The direct translation is this group of apple. The classifier has changed in here as the quantity is not specified and it is describing multiple apples. The classifier changed from 個 to 啲 in here. The rules also apply when you're using the third person pronoun. Just a reminder that there is an exhaustive list of classifier in Cantonese, and the use of classifier are highly dependent on what object or the quantity of the objects you're describing. And again, plurals are not inflected in nouns. One apple is called an apple, and 1,000 apples is still called an apple in Cantonese. We still refer it to apple. In other words, for Cantonese influent speakers to omit the plural markers s or ies at the end of the noun, and omitting articles in English is expected. Classifiers are also used in Mandarin, and the rules do apply to Mandarin. However, keep in mind that the semantics or word choices of classifiers will be quite different from Cantonese because of the dialectal differences. Another some common errors in Chinese speakers when speaking in English will be like this. The first sentence is, the cars are parked in the parking lot. Since there's no articles, plurals, inflections, or auxiliary in Cantonese, the sentence might sound like, car park in parking lot. Another example, since auxiliary do not exist in Cantonese, they don't want the frog might sound like, they not want the frog. Also, for dual language learners learning English, overgeneralizing the rules are very common. For example, they didn't go to the store might become they didn't went to the store. Now let's take a brain break, and when you're ready, I'll see you in part 2 of the video, which will dive into the characteristics of Cantonese SLI.